Hello, welcome. My name's Austin. I'm a member of Catalyst Co-op, and I'm here with three other members of Catalyst. And today we want to just share with you some of our insights about what it's like working at a cooperative, why we like it, what some of the challenges are, and demystify some questions folks might have about this very interesting and unique organizational structure. So, without further ado, um, I'll jump into the first question, which is why we initially decided to set up Catalyst as a cooperative.
Well, I guess that's for Christina and I, since we were there. We just needed a container in which to do work. Like we had both been working at a little nonprofit, a 501(c)(3) in Colorado, and the opportunity to do some more data-oriented work came along. And that nonprofit wasn't interested really in taking that direction. So we decided we needed to have a vehicle for doing that work. And I think we'd both just done a lot of other kinds of co-op development, like housing co-ops, food co-ops, and it seemed like a natural container. Like, well, we want a company that employs us to do some work, and like, of course, we would make a worker co-op. Just I don't know. It seemed like a natural extension of other co-op development work that we had done. But what do you think, Christina?
I'll just add, I think that the nonprofit model felt good, like it's where we came from. So that felt good in a lot of ways. And we were trying to build an open public resource. So we definitely thought about doing this work in a nonprofit model. Um, and I think that the possibility of forever being reliant on charitable giving and philanthropy didn't feel super appealing to us. I also think that it felt exciting to be able to, uh, while doing a mission driven thing, have a little bit more autonomy over our day-to-day decision making and work processes. So for us, the decision was like, should we go with a nonprofit, or should we go with at least for me it was the nonprofit versus a worker co-op. Um, for me, it didn't, for a lot of us, I don't think it really crossed our mind to make like a standard um, business, in large part because, we wanted to make sure our future selves were going to be good curators of this tool. And like good curators of the mission and the project that we were about to work on, and that we wanted to make sure that they're like our future collaborators, which we hoped to have, would have the same amount of like say and autonomy and responsibility and ownership of the project.
Yeah, I think a lot of it came down to the autonomy. Like if we were a nonprofit, there would be a board, and that board would be largely external people who are not, engaged in the day-to-day operation of the organization, the business. But as a co-op, we the employees are the board for the time being while we're small, and that yeah, having that kind of like self-control was definitely attractive. We thought about the worker nonprofit or the worker directed nonprofit organization model that Janelle Orsi has tried to popularize. But in the end, yeah, just having a worker owned business seemed like the most well aligned with our goals and our experiences with democratic governance in other small organizations.
Awesome. I think we can jump into the next one then. What are some co-op specific barriers that Catalyst has essentially had to overcome to become what it is today?
A thing that I don't think of often as a barrier, but um, I hear it from a lot of other worker co-ops, is that access to capital is hard. Access to especially when starting up, access to capital is hard. Um, and in an ongoing way, it can be quite challenging. For us, I think that when we were starting out, because we're not like building a thing and then like expecting to become like super, super profitable and be able to pay off either a bunch of loans or, you know, venture capital type investments in our business, like that was never a part of our imagination, and therefore it hasn't really been a barrier because we haven't tried to access it. but it certainly like it would be if we went down that path. Just because of some of the structural setups of worker co-ops. So because we didn't imagine that or want to go down that path, it kind of wasn't a barrier, or hasn't been a barrier. But I feel like that's the first thing I think of when I think of a barrier for starting and sustaining worker co-ops is like, yeah, like if we needed to build anything like physical in the world or like invest some upfront capital, I don't know if this would be a much more challenging model.
Yeah, and we kind of sidestep that by having access to, like, one, not trying to create a proprietary good. We are trying to create public goods, public informational goods, public interest technology. And that meant that we had access to grant funding, which has been able to play a lot of the role that I think that kind of startup capital would play in other kinds of businesses. So it let us, build a basic proof of concept and get something that was, useful up and running initially. Um, and because the only inputs really are our time and effort, our labor, that worked pretty well. Yeah, I think it hasn't really been a barrier, but maybe a source of friction that has come up occasionally is just explaining to the rest of the world what we are.
Mm.
People will often assume that we're a 501(c)(3) nonprofit because of the kind of work that we're doing. And we have to like explain like, well, no, we're not really. We're actually technically a for-profit business. And then like for-profit business has all of these other connotations that are also not quite correct for us. So we're like a low profit business. And yeah, I mean, I think we also struggle sometimes with our outside collaborators having a hard time understanding who's in charge and, defaulting to Christina and I, and probably just because we've been around for the longest. Yeah, maybe not always understanding, like, well, we need to go talk to the other members and see whether this is something we want to do or not.
Yeah, I think in a similar vein, I think the non-hierarchical structure is mostly a blessing, but at times it can feel like um, it can feel bad to delegate the less desirable task to someone, or certain people feel like it feels like they're taking on more of the burden at different times, and making sure that that workload evens out, and that everybody does a mix of the tasks that they're good at and they really want to do and the less desirable tasks that nobody wants to do. So just generally not having a standard project management structure, standard like HR department, or kind of the things that you would find at a normal workplace can be tricky sometimes. It's just an adjustment.
One extra thing that I think makes distributed decision-making work is transparency.
Mhm.
One of my hobby horses in Catalyst has just been like to make sure that we all understand our collective finances and we understand how our decisions about where we work, what we focus on, and like what projects we take on affect our collective resources. And yeah, we both need a degree of like ongoing understanding of the like month to month and day to day decisions, and also the like, yeah, I feel like I've had to learn a lot about like what standard financing, like bookkeeping and general like business reporting means, and attempt to share out that information amongst us. So it's not, so we're all making good collective decisions together.
That actually reminds me of one tool for overcoming a barrier that we're really good at, and I think is really unique to the co-op structure, like really getting to know each other, I think, on a more human level and understanding what each of us maybe cares about, where we're plugged in the organization, and like how we can empathize with one another, consider their perspectives, or consider like, oh, this person likes to verbally process, or this person likes to write things down, or this person, likes, I don't know, afternoon meetings or something like that, just so that we can come together at a place where everyone feels comfortable and like they've had the opportunity to weigh in a way that is most effective for them. And I think that goes a long way in terms of decision making and consensus building and things like that. Mhm. Awesome. The next question, which is more focused on the hierarchy aspect. And I want to clarify too at the beginning that non-hierarchy isn't implicit. For cooperatives, that is how we've decided to structure ourselves. So if one of you guys wants to touch on that too, the decision to start in a non-hierarchical place, whether that's common for cooperatives, what type of hierarchy you might find in other cooperatives, and then we can jump into the question of how hierarchy affects our work in practice and how we work around things like accountability when we don't have a boss.
Yeah, I think there's an element of like consent to be governed in this. It's not like different people don't have different amounts of responsibility in different tasks, different domains that we're working in. It's yeah, but it's about managing like, okay, well, who is familiar with this technology that we're using? Like maybe they should have more responsibility for coming up with a reasonable design. Or who is more familiar with the this foundation or this grant domain that we're applying for. So like who has more responsibility kind of rotates around depending on the domain and who has capacity to work on things at any given time. So it's yeah, it's not like everybody has equal input into every single decision and every single activity that we take. Um, and I do think that we have learned over time about when it's important to get everybody's sign off on something. In particular, this last year, we got quite a long ways down writing a significant grant just within the grant development team with kind of a lot of direction from the foundation that we were applying to. And by the time the proposal kind of came to the whole organization, the whole co-op, they're like, hey, we're, about to do this thing. It was kind of too late to either say no or to dramatically change direction. And we got some feedback that it would have been good to know earlier what the hell we were planning to do. So now, like the grant dev, before we put in a bunch of hours to write a grant or like really come to some understanding with the organization or the foundation that we're trying to get money from, we now like come back to an all team meeting, the
Mhm.
puddle huddle, and ask like, here's what we're planning to do. Here's an outline, like in bulletized form. Does this seem like a thing that we should do as an organization? Because like, yeah, I mean, we're dedicating hundreds or potentially thousands of hours of our time to doing this thing, and especially with grants, like typically the overhead does not totally cover all of the organizational costs of existing. So it's good to have agreement that yeah, we're going to expend a little bit of organizational surplus, some profit that comes from client work to make sure that this grant work can be completed, and everybody needs to be on board with thinking that that's a productive use of our time and energy.
Absolutely. Well, cool. In a similar vein, I'm curious, with the non-hierarchy, a question that I get often is, how do you make decisions? What happens if there's a clash of opinions? And how do you move forward if there's not sort of one definitive voice saying this is the way? And my answer to that is often, we're actually really good at consensus here at Catalyst. And, I don't think we're particularly special. And so my question is, what have we done about our culture to cultivate this sort of consensus building ethos? And how have we been able to be so successful at it? And in times when we haven't been as successful, what have we done to work around that?
Just process wise, some of the things that we do is that um, we have two standing meetings, both for like the full team, which often overlaps exactly with our board, which right now is all of our members. And sometimes we cancel those meetings because there's no agenda items, but you have to put an agenda item on the, document beforehand, and if in a like in a same in a structure that we all like know and are familiar with, and with like a time and a description and a place for pre-meeting discussion. So folks often, we really ask that people like put those agenda items on 24 hours before the meeting, and there's this place for pre-meeting discussion, and like that gets through a lot of the, not everyone like super engages in pre-meeting discussion, but that does get through a lot of the like early gunk, not gunk, but like it sifts through the questions that are going to come up in real time, and then we're able to kind of cut right to the places in our meetings that like really need the most work in order to get to a place of consensus. Yeah, that's the like structural. That's two of the like main, like the kind of boring, just process things I think have really helped us.
I think one thing that helps us reach consensus relatively easily is, there's a pretty strong filter on who becomes a member. You know, you need to be pretty on board with the mission of the organization to become a member, partly because we're offering an unusual compensation package that not everybody is going to be enthusiastic about, right? So we pay significantly lower wages than probably you would have historically been able to get for doing the same kind of work. And we offer a lot more kind of flexibility on autonomy. Um, and also you get to work on, open source, open data, climate focused work. So the people who have signed up to be part of Catalyst we've all already agreed kind of at a high level on some mission orientation and, shared values, which makes this much easier than if it was just a random collection of, technical people that have been dropped into a business together and had to make a bunch of decisions together.
I think it like starts from joining and seeing that um, there are times when it's not necessary to like chime in, or it's not necessary to like uh yeah, have a super opinionated take on a decision that is actually relatively minor, because I can feel like some decisions are make or break, and then if we actually zoom out at the co-op, it's pretty inconsequential. So just recognizing when something really matters versus when potentially like looping on one decision could lead to like infinite meeting time. And I think as a co-op, we're pretty good at being wary of infinite meeting time, especially being fully remote. It's pretty draining to be on the phone all day and just feeling like we have a lot of actual work that we could be getting done. And I think like, yeah, that priority of like minimizing synchronous call time has been helpful for quickly reaching a consensus at times.
Yes, to all of that. I also think that the like similar to what y'all are saying, that having a clear, albeit like sometimes vague, we have a clear mission that has a like the like particularities of the strategy and like how we implement the vision is often something that we need to like rework and redecide on and all the things. But having a clear like we're trying to do this thing, we know what it is. There's many different directions we could go in that, but it like we kind of have a clear focus. It's easy to say like, is this going to help our clear mission or not? Or is this like a distraction or not? So that for me, I think that helps a lot in our decision-making process. Sometimes when we do disagree, and it's hard to make decisions without eating a lot of eating, like working through that with a lot of meeting time, we have just delayed decisions, which sometimes can feel annoying. Certainly, like it can be both frustrating, just to like kind of like we know that there's this decision that we're trying to make that's out there that we kind of have hanging over us. And also, yeah, we like there's when there are a variety of opinions that are strong about a thing that feels core or like not, not a piddly little thing. We often just give it time. And like the last big decision that I think we like truly didn't know how we were going to come to a consensus around. We have an annual retreat and we like saved it for that. And we talked about it in person, and it was really nice to yeah, one of our members like facilitated us through that process that like, and it was, yeah, I think we came to a good place and got all of our like, it was really nice. We like started with hopes and also fears, and we were able to like see like, did we get through the hopes, and did we like mitigate the fears in making this decision? And yeah, then we were able to like move forward with a degree of clarity. around a decision that was hard for us to make. So it had a bunch of trade-offs. So yeah, sometimes this model does indeed take more time to get to a clear decision, but I think we made a much better decision than if like just I or Zane, who like started Catalyst, were like able to just make it. I think we made a much better decision with everybody's input.
One other thing I think is unique to Catalyst, potentially the co-op structure, is we have the ability to kind of constantly redefine ourselves or backtrack and change decisions and reevaluate processes that we have in place. So we build a structure that works for ourselves, but then we have the power basically at any given point to say, this is no longer working for us. Let's like not just look at the decisions we're making, but the structure in which we're making those decisions and try and make it incrementally better and better. And so I think that relieves some of the pressure as well when you're trying to make a really tough decision to say like this is, going to be final version, definitive, yes, finally sending this. Like there's always space to circle back and say, is this working for us or not? And that's another thing we've implemented as a team is these retrospective meetings where we'll come together and talk about either a project that we were working on or a meeting we had or something, and we can go over what's worked, what hasn't worked. We have project management check-ins where we share how we've wrangled each other, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And that just constant ability to be improving Catalyst is really helpful in terms of, I think, building consensus and feeling like we're building an organization that we all are supportive of and proud of and feel like is reaching for something continually better and reinventing itself as necessary.
Yeah. I will say this can also spiral
Yes.
sometimes
Pros
where
and
like
cons.
having the ability to constantly change things doesn't mean it's necessarily good to be constantly changing things. And I think we have struggled sometimes with like adopting a new decision making or project management structure, and then um, there's always some friction in like changing patterns of behavior and planning. And like we need to stick with a decision for long enough to get to where it feels like the new normal to really evaluate whether it's better or worse or what its strengths and weaknesses are. And I think especially early on, we would occasionally get caught in this kind of like churn of process change and experimentation where like we never really got to where something felt familiar enough to be able to iterate on it again. And I think we've gotten better at that over time, being like, look, we're going to let this go for an entire quarter or 2 quarters or a year even, and then we're going to talk about whether it worked or not. And this is, I think, a pretty common co-op problem that you can get just mired in process and decision making, and it's just good to be aware of that and like exercise the autonomy in a judicious way and not just for the sake of exercising it because you can.
Awesome. Well, that's pretty relevant, I think, to the next question, which is about the balance between being both an owner and an employee and how that affects our decision makings around things like workload and compensation, among other things.
I can go first. As the most recent convert from being an employee to an owner, I think yeah, it is a little bit of a transition for newer members. In particular, normal benefits that you would associate with being an employee that your employer would provide. The biggest shift is realizing that you are providing those benefits to yourself at your own cost. So, for example, we've looked at corporate health insurance plans and done the math and realized that actually, as owners of the co-op, it's less beneficial to us than as in our employee role. And the same is true of a lot of tax decisions and kind of, yeah, a lot of those like standard things that we associate with the responsibility of an owner in American companies. And that can feel like a bummer. because I think you see more immediate payoff as an employee than you do as an owner. For example, wages. Like you feel mostly like an employee in your day to day, and then there's moments when I feel like an owner. From the financial perspective, like when we do our profit sharing, I'm like, "Oh, okay, this is my owner responsibility." But then also, um, yeah, the feeling of like having ownership of the work and being able to really change the direction of the co-op if I want, or the direction of a project, feels a lot more like the owner role. And I think it's really easy in work to feel no ownership over your work if the decision is coming from the top down. So it's pretty cool to actually feel like a responsibility over work, and feel like the direction that I take my work will have actual payoff for me, and that it's something that I value. So I think the owner benefits and role is a little bit more nebulous and intangible than the employee role. And oftentimes they feel pretty distinct, but I think that the owner payoff is what really makes the co-op structure unique and special.
I think for us, one of the things that is unique about how we structured our benefits, that I think would only have happened if we sat on both sides of this, the like employee versus employer fence, is that like we have pretty, like, I think truly pretty flexible, unpaid time off. And that, like I really value that a lot. I think we've attracted a lot of people that really value that and have like we have a minimum threshold of like amount of work that you need to do in a year, like amount of hours you need to put in a year. And you can take pretty long chunks of like time off, which is both challenging for the co-op at times when like if I am kind of the sole person on a job that is ongoing. If I leave, that means I need to like do a bunch of knowledge transfer and like make sure that's covered and blah blah blah. So it can be challenging. But it also it's from a wage perspective, it's effectively free for the co-op to provide. And it so like from the employer perspective, it's like, yeah, of course, take time off as long as you get the responsibilities covered and you have enough engagement in the co-op over the medium to long run that it works well. Yeah, that's like I think that's an example of something that we've done that's creative because it really doesn't cost the co-op anything except for coordination. And I think honestly, I think has done us really well in terms of like when someone takes a good chunk of time off, it helps us increase redundancy in our work. And I think it helps with making the co-op as a whole like much more resilient to bumps in the roads. And it also is just like I think a lot of I really value it, and I think people often come back like happier and more excited to be a human, and therefore usually better at their job. So I think that is an example of us playing both roles and being creative about it. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that like it is annoying sometimes to be like, oh, this person's going to be gone for a month. We need to like download whatever like specific knowledge they have or figure out who else needs to be an administrator on such and such account. Um, but it is, yeah, it's definitely beneficial to the organization to have little bite-sized chunks of people disappearing so that you're not surprised after, someone leaves after 4 years, and you're like, oh, wow, they had the keys to all of these different things that we like have to get done. And now none of us have any idea how to do those things. Yeah, I think something we haven't really exercised much, but that this structure allows us to do is if there's a time when there's a lot more work that we need to get done, the fact that people are working on average, maybe 25 hours a week, like there's spare capacity there in theory that you can be like, look, this month we have a bunch of deadlines that happen to have stacked up. We need people to work more hours, and you can work more hours without being working like 50 hours a week or 60 hours a week, which, is extremely unpleasant for a lot of people. And then also, if we are if we were to go through a lean time when like we're waiting for, new contracts or, waiting to hear back on a grant, like we also have the possibility of ramping down and being like, who would like to take a skiing vacation or, go on a bike trip or something to, reduce the burn rate through like our resources on hand. Um, yeah, which is, those are both things that if it was a pure like employer-employee relationship, would feel definitely less comfortable to me to be like, we'd like you to work less now, or we'd like you to work more than you're used to working now. Um, but as an owner, like you see, like, okay, no, like we really do need to either ramp up or ramp down because of external circumstances. And yeah, it gives us it's one of the tools in our toolbox for dealing with the challenges of being a small business with irregular kind of work.
Yeah, I think another decision that we've made a few times now is that I think reflect the all of us sitting on both sides of this, um, like having multiple roles in this process, is that the last few times that we have given ourselves like raises or cost of living adjustments, we've almost entirely, I think actually entirely for the last few years, put those into increases in employer contributions to our retirement accounts. And because that's what we all wanted, and it's very tax advantage, and um, it gives us, yeah, that's what we all wanted, is we could decide to do that. And that's, yeah, it's fun to be able to check in with everybody on things like uh, on all those kinds of policies and see like, can we financially make this decision in a way that is good for the co-op, that helps us, like enables us to continue to be employed and have stable work and all the things, and also benefit us as individuals.
Awesome. All right. The next question I want to jump into is about success and how we define success as a group and how that might differ from other more traditional organizational structures.
I think this is actually maybe the one of the things we struggle most at. I think on like a zooming in on a granular level, um, we can have like, classic deliverables for a project or success criteria. And we do try to define that at the start of like a client project or a grant or something. Um, and then I think due to, in part, a lack of hierarchy and project management, it can feel like it's very easy to have kind of scope creep, or for a project to be out of budget, um, or for us to redefine our success criteria. And in some ways, it's nice to be flexible in that way. But in other ways, yeah, I mean, projects can just drag on a lot longer than we thought, or it can feel like we didn't accomplish what we set out to. Um, and that's probably true if you do have a project management and that or project manager, and that kind of change in success criteria. Probably it's more frustrating if you don't have transparency into why it's changing. So I do think it's cool that we can pivot, or that like more opinions can be introduced and we can rethink. Um, but I do often think that we struggle with defining success. On an organizational level, I do think a lot of our decisions are mission driven, and it comes back to like, does this align with our mission? That being said, it's hard to adjust our theory of change, or what we think that how we think we're going to make impact in our field, without getting together in person to talk about it. Um, and so I think we're actually less flexible in defining success on an organizational level. And it's hard to zoom out and try to see if we are successful. Um, I think there's like tangible ways that we measure success, like financial check-ins, or even newsletters and blog posts about the work that we have completed. So kind of getting those nuggets of yeah, like the of feeling like we're doing real successful work is really helpful when a lot of the times there's swirling priorities.
Yeah, I think in the financial domain, we multiple years ago at this point, like defined some performance indicators where like this is the metric we're going to track, and this is the level at which we think it's acceptable versus unacceptable. And I think it's been clarifying, like to know, yes, we have enough money kind of committed that we will be able to pay ourselves for the next year, even if we didn't bring in any additional grants or find any other large contracts. So we've struggled to come up with similarly concrete and well-tracked metrics as far as impact. I know, like obviously, one of the main points here is to keep us employed, like doing work that we feel is meaningful and like learning useful things. Like, and I think thus far we've done well with that. We've never had to lay people off, and we have been able to have like at least a year's worth of runway for paying ourselves for quite a while now, which is, especially lately, more stability than a lot of certainly small tech companies have had, which is great. But I think we need to come up with something analogous for our impact, like looking at usage metrics, who is using the data, what are they using it for, what are their frustrations, are we addressing their frustrations? So, we have an ongoing project right now funded by the NSF grant to get better at interpreting and analyzing those numbers internally so that we can have, yeah, something similar.
This question is about growth and scaling. Essentially curious what Catalyst's position towards growth and scaling has been in the last couple of years. Has that changed over time? And where do we sort of see ourselves moving in the future in terms of organizational capacity and number of members?
I can try to take a first stab at this one. This is a thing that we've talked about, you know, on and off since we started, really. And I think often what it comes down to is the like, is there a sweet spot for meeting our needs in terms of our size? So our needs often are like, what do we want to get done so we can have this kind of impact? And what do we want in terms of stability and like some financial security and redundancy on our team? And what do we want like socially and organizationally? Like how do we want work to feel? Yeah, and there's tension in different sizes for all of those like desires and needs. Like for me personally, I think the size that we're at right now is really a sweet spot where I feel like I can like know everyone. There's a little bit of distinguishing of roles and responsibilities. But we're not so large that we need like a lot of that we need more hierarchy. Like I think we can manage ourselves at this size without a degree of hierarchy. I think if we grew a lot, we would need a change. We've also talked about in the past about the like rate of change. There were a few years where we were hiring like 1 or 2 people a year, and for us that was a lot. And we had to do that thing that Zane was mentioning before of like constantly kind of readapting our processes in order to accommodate for more folks and never really settling into a process like a way of how we were moving together, and like we never really settling into our formation because our formation was constantly changing, and that was kind of, yeah, it was a challenge in a way. But we have often talked about growth and been all, I think, collectively excited about it in the context of like imagining a type of project or imagining a type of work that we would build into or grow or move into that we believed in its impact. So like it seems like for us there's some degree of reluctancy to grow, except for but a reluctancy to grow, but a willingness to do it if it's gonna enable us to yeah, to make a bigger impact in our work. And some projects like we couldn't take on sustainably if we don't grow. So yeah, there's a lot of tension there, and I think this is another place where like being the employee and the employer I think is quite helpful, where we can say like, I like working at this size. For me, this is ideal, but I know that like organizationally it'll benefit us to grow a little bit. And therefore I'm willing to sacrifice that a little bit of my personal desire around our size for the entity. And there, yeah, it's just like a lot of trade-offs there. We're certainly not in a growth for growth's sake kind of work, which I really deeply appreciate.
Yeah, I think I mean, at some point earlier in this conversation, we talked about the consensus building process and how at this size of like 8 or 10 people, everybody has some level of knowledge of all of the other people, some kind of one-on-one relationship because you've worked on a project together or whatever. Um, and I think, at 20 people, like if you're twice our size, that starts to break down. Like you would have some people that you had like a real working relationship with, and other people that maybe you've only kind of are acquainted with, but don't have a lot of personal connection with. And that would be different from a kind of decision making and organizational management point of view. I think, in our bylaws, we have a provision that if we reach 11 members, we'll elect a board of 5 members because, organizational decision making, as you get more and more people trying to come to consensus, it does become more challenging, potentially more time consuming. Um, but at the same time, like I think that we would probably benefit from some amount of additional specialization internally. Like right now, we all have like kind of a lot of overlap in our skills and technical experience. And there are other things that it would be good for the organization to be able to do, like web front-end development or data visualization, or somebody who's really into doing the administrative work, or dedicated to doing grant writing. Um, so I could definitely see growing somewhat. I could imagine us being a company of 20 people because I think at that level you still don't need a lot of the like institutionalized bureaucracy. Um, but we would be able to have substantially more kind of skills diversity and specialization within the organization that would let us take on more diverse and larger tasks as a company. And I think that would probably good for us. But it is more mouths to feed, right? You would need like a much higher, potentially twice the flux of money coming through the organization. And yeah, it would be different. So I think for me personally, I am more interested in staying about this size, but maybe gradually specializing internally a little bit more to just see how that feels organizationally. And if it feels good, then maybe growing into having a little bit more differentiation of responsibilities within the org.
Yeah, I think kind of in that vein, it also feels like there is like this kind of hump that we could surpass where if we took a risk and grew a little, uh, there's kind of like benefits that we could afford ourselves, like paying ourselves more, because we would probably be more profitable. And one aspect of growth that's kind of interesting to me is that it feels like everybody in our little organization is on an individual level in a similar place in life and has similar life priorities. And I think if one of us wanted to have a kid or another major life changer, we would have to respect someone who felt like they needed to make a lot more money than we do currently, or someone who felt like they needed to work full-time hours and be treated more like a senior software engineer or something. And so we've been somewhat lucky to all agree on our life priorities and feeling like we don't need growth kind of in our lifestyles. But it also means that we have a harder time, I think, attracting a diversity of new hires. Like diversity in a traditional sense, but also it feels like we aren't fully capable of like hiring someone with like a deep tech background who really might be able to like help our technical infrastructure, or someone who has like a ton of project management experience or something. So it does limit our hiring capacity, I think. And we inherently have to attract people who have similar lifestyle values that we do right now, which is both a strength and a weakness, I think.
Okay, awesome. The last question I want to pose, and maybe we can just do kind of a quick round robin, is how do you know whether working at a co-op is right for you as an individual, whether you're thinking of starting a co-op or joining a co-op? What are the characteristics you think it takes in a human being to thrive in this kind of environment?
I'll start as someone who was never in a housing co-op or food co-op or anything and just sort of stumbled upon the co-op landscape. I think a general like skepticism of like standard corporate structure and the feeling of wanting some ownership over your work and wanting ownership over your work-life balance and like feeling like a high level of flexibility is a priority.
Yes to that. And also, I will add a willingness to navigate conflict and nuance decision making with other people. You're not always gonna like super love either the people or the decisions that other people want to make, and figuring out how to show up as a kind human in those decisions, and also like sit through some conflict at times, which will happen. And no one is gonna like come down from on high and say like this is the right way to move, or like stop doing that, or like, yeah, a willingness to navigate the complexities of humans.
Yeah, I think you really need to value autonomy. Like if you just want to be told what to do and not have to like feel too responsible for it and like turn the crank and do your job, then this is probably not going to offer a lot of benefits to you as an employee slash owner. But if that's something that you feel like you've been frustrated with at other jobs where you want to have more of like a say and the ability to participate in decisions and you have strong ideas about how things could be better, then this structure where you're like very explicitly empowered and you like really need to be involved in that kind of decision making and priority setting process, then that offers potentially a real benefit to you as a member.